Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and clicking on the bell for notifications. This is the channel to learn about literature and life. So, as the title of this video says, this is Teaching Jack Kerouac. So I've wanted to make a video on Kerouac and especially on the Road for a long time. And I just taught Kerouac and parts of On the Road for two different classes just 2 weeks ago. And so what I'm going to do is actually show you exactly how I teach Kerouac. So this will be slightly different. I'm going to actually show you my lecture notes that I use and kind of explain how I break down teaching Kerouac over the course of 2 days in a normal college English class. In fact, exactly how I taught it just the week before Thanksgiving 2025. So let's go to my lecture notes here. And now what I've got on the screen, this is just what I have printed out for myself. So you can see so the way it's written is not for the students because I do not put this on the overhead. I do not share it with them at all. It's just for me only. And so you can see what I've got there is just at the top, just some information about where Kerouac is at in the actual textbook. I use the Norton Anthology of American Literature shorter edition. And then there's just a reminder there from when I taught it last spring that it works just fine to teach it in 2 days. It's kind of really important to just leave little notes for yourself only in your lecture notes so that when you come back to teach an author that you might not have done for 2 or 3 or 4 years, you can remember, okay, last time I did this, I taught it in 1 class period, or I taught it in 2 class periods. So again, what I'm showing you right now are just my own personal notes that I use and look at. And so we'll just take a quick look at this, and then we'll start looking at the text itself. So again, I taught this in 2 days in the spring. I just taught it in 2 days just a couple of weeks ago. So first day, emphasis is on the wanderer stage of archetypes. So this is just what I would plan on doing in that first class. Each class is an hour and 15 minutes long, so 2 days a week. And actually what's really interesting is in the Norton Anthology that we use, which is called the Norton Anthology of American Literature, shorter 10th edition, the Kerouac selection has his biographical introduction, and then it has chapter 1 and the last chapter of On the Road. So it's just got the first chapter and the last chapter. And that combined with the biographical introduction only takes up about 7 or 8, maybe 9 pages total in the entire Norton Anthology. So it's really interesting to try to figure out. It's almost like a game, like what has the Norton Anthology put in there and how can I adapt that? Because I'm a big fan of forcing students to buy the printed textbook, no computers, and also just working with what's in there. So I don't have a lot of handouts or anything like that. So there you go. Okay, so we can just see here, first day, it says emphasis on the wanderer stage of archetypes. So I'll explain that in a few minutes. I bring up a PowerPoint and I quickly review some information about the beat generation characteristics. Now this is a review because in this course, English 210 American Literature 2, I would have already taught Allen Ginsberg probably just the previous week. And so I would have already defined and explained who the major writers are in the beat generation. And we would have had one class where we went through portions of Ginsberg's Howl. So again, just review some of those things. Then what I'm going to do, 1B, is emphasize spontaneity in Kerouac's writing, Proust, that is Marcel Proust, and the emphasis of him. And then it just says time, religion, and I'll explain that a little bit. So again, it just says 1, A, B, C, D, E. And then this is what I'm going to accomplish in a class that lasts 1 hour and 15 minutes. C, read the first 2 sentences at the beginning of the novel and then all of the famous last paragraph, and then begin to ask students what they see as significant. And then after that, so we've read the first 2 sentences and then the very famous last paragraph where he says, don't you know the goddess Pooh Bear? And he mentions Iowa. And it's just one of the most beautiful paragraphs ever written in literature. After that, then we're going to go with a sort of line by line or a close reading of the text, and then maybe end day 1 by the time we get through some of chapter 1 and the line I shambled after, which is also a famous passage, where he's talking about following after Neil Cassidy and Allen Ginsberg. Then the second day of the Kerouac would be an emphasis on the spiritual quest of the novel. And then what I might do at the very beginning of the second class is I bring up what Kerouac wrote as his I would bring up what Kerouac wrote as his essentials of prose, and then just bring it up on the overhead, and the students will not have seen it before, have them look at it with me, and then, ask the students what they think about it, maybe have them say which of these things are religious in some way, because I would have already emphasized on day 1, when I talked a little bit about Kerouac's biography, his intense feelings of being a Catholic and also of being a Buddhist, and how many people might find that contradictory, and maybe Kerouac did at times too, but it's probably nothing that was more important to him than his sense of being a Catholic and of also being a Buddhist. So, great. Awesome. So there we go. So again, these are just notes for me. Now, I'm going to show you what I actually, as I skim down here, as you can see at the top of this page. Now, what I've got on the screen right now and what I would have on the overhead for the students is the entirety of what I would say are the sort of lecture notes. Now, this I would actually put up on the overhead. And as you can see at the top, it says overhead for students after quiz on first of 2 teaching days. So just so you understand how this works as far as classroom management, the very first day of teaching Kerouac, I have a quiz right at the beginning of class, the moment that class starts. An old school quiz where you pass out a piece of paper and it's got 3 questions on it. Maybe one of them is a multiple choice, and then questions 2 and 3 are a short answer. The whole thing takes just a couple of minutes. It might be something like, just a quiz question about where did Kerouac go to college or something like that, or briefly describe Kerouac's college experience. And then something about who arrives in chapter 1 of On the Road, what's the character's name, and how does it affect the narrator. So something like that, real short reading quiz. And then just to kind of explain the mechanics of how to teach a college English class in literature. So you start right off the bat with a quiz. Why is that important? Well, make it an easy quiz so that if students have done the reading, they get 100%. That's great. If students haven't done the reading, they get a 0. So it motivates them to do the reading. That's all it is. There's no rocket science to it. Now, the way I do things is that quiz right at the beginning of the very first day, once the students start taking it, then I put what you see on the screen, which says, Carl Jung, Archetypal Literary Criticism, blah, 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 on down to Marcel Proust. I put that up on the overhead, and as the students are taking their quizzes and the room is quiet, etc., then I just kind of quietly say to them, take as much time as you need with your quiz. All the time in the world, keep your eyes on your own paper, be quiet, please, and just take all the time you want. When you're done with your quiz, place it face down on your desk, get out whatever it is you want to take notes with, and then begin to take notes of some of the things on the overhead. Boom. So then there's this whole page of things on the overhead. And so now some of the students who finish their quiz quickly can begin taking those notes. The other students can take as long as they want. Since it's a short quiz, it's only going to take, even the students who take a long time, they'll finish it in 6 or 7 minutes, 8 minutes at the most. Boom. Collect the quizzes. Now this is up on the overhead. So now the actual teaching portion begins. They've had time to write down some of the things. Now listen, what's important is that you don't overload students with too much information on the overhead, and you don't turn it into a lecture. For myself, I lecture a smidge at the beginning of a literature class on concepts from psychology or literary theory or important dates in history. So, for example, when I'm teaching T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, you got to spend some time talking a little bit about not only World War I, just in general, but also things like what Eliot was reading at the time. But this is more than enough. What you see on the screen right now is more than enough for the students to have had on the screen to look at. So, great. Now, once class has begun, I'm going to talk about archetypal literary criticism a little bit there. And then I'm going to focus basically on the individuation process and talk a little bit about that. And then this is where it's kind of fun, because then as you explain the individuation process, and these terms, I think everything that I've got up there is just something I've written myself. So I used to try to take quotations from Jungians like Marie-Louise von Franz or somebody like that to describe the individuation process. But I've read that so much and I've taught it so much that now I just use my own definition. So for me, what is individuation, as it says in the middle of the screen? Individuation is a process of spiritual and psychological fulfillment of personal potential, and that it usually includes these things. Now, if you're watching this and you like Carl Jung, or you like the idea of archetypes, or psychology, or anything like that, or you're a movie buff, you may recognize that a lot of these things kind of come from Joseph Campbell. So back towards the top, it says the use of the theories of Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, Marie-Louise von Franz. And so many of you may be aware that Joseph Campbell's work on mythology had an extremely strong influence on George Lucas when he was writing the original Star Wars. So these things, call to adventure, meeting with different character types, blah, blah, blah. Those are things that you can kind of clearly see in an archetypal analysis of Star Wars. And if I want to, I can even explain some of individuation to the students using a movie like that. So that works out great. And then, so it says here, in the novel On the Road, this is towards the bottom, Dean precipitates a change in the narrator. In archetypal psychology, this is referred to as the wanderer archetype. Now, so again, what I really want to show you in this video is how I teach a college literature class. This is exactly how I taught it just 2 weeks ago, right here in Tuscaloosa. So this is what I had on the overhead. Maybe I take about 10 minutes. And then at the bottom, you can see it says also on the final, meaning on the final exam, the footnote and explanation in the text of Marcel Proust's novel. So now we're in class. We're on the first day. I've had a quiz. After that, I put this up on the overhead. Students had time to take some of it down. I explained some of it. Now, I don't want to linger too long here because I want to get into the text itself. So let's go ahead and do that. And now we're looking at, again, I would put this on the overhead, which is the Norton Anthology of American Literature, shorter 10th edition. And as I said a couple minutes ago, what's interesting is in the Norton Anthology, they have the biographical introduction to Kerouac, and then they have 2 chapters. They have chapter 1 of On the Road and the final chapter. Now, you may think that's crazy or that doesn't work out. My idea is work with what you've got, and I originally thought that was weird, but now I love it because it just works out perfectly. Actually, once, 8 years ago in 2017, I remember this, I actually had the students buy the entire novel On the Road, and we went over it over a 2-week period. That was a little heavy and a little strong, and it made me exclude some of the other authors that I wanted to teach in, 20th century American literature. Okay, so what I have in blue here, if this were class, then I would have I just highlighted that, have it on the board. That gives me a chance to spontaneously sort of talk a little bit about Columbia, Ginsberg, Burroughs. But remember, we'll go over here for just a moment and look at the PowerPoint that I used. So this is a PowerPoint that I would have used for Allen Ginsberg. Apparently I taught him November 3, so a few weeks ago. And so I'm just going to show you super quick. These are some of the things that we already went over in my literature class the week before Kerouac when we read Ginsberg. And then I kind of slowly went through some things and talked about what are the characteristics of the Beat Generation writers. They met at Columbia University, expansion of consciousness, rejection of middle-class values, importance of spontaneity. And when you have some things up here which are both specific, and then they allow you to, if you know the author well, as I know Ginsberg and Kerouac very, very well, and I love them, then you have these up on the board and they allow you to The students can write these things down and be tested on them in the final, obviously, but it also allows you to be spontaneous as a teacher. So when it says importance of spontaneity in writing, that allows me to now go off on a riff spontaneously and talk about the influence of jazz, about how Kerouac writes about jazz so brilliantly and on the road, his idea of first thought, best thought, different things about Ginsberg also believing in spontaneity, etc. So, beautiful picture of them. And then I also, when I taught Ginsberg several weeks ago, I like to show this photo, which is beautiful. And I brought in a physical copy of my book, Howl, by Allen Ginsberg, because it was published by City Lights in 1955. And I talk about the physical properties of the actual published book and hold it up in my hands and show it to them and then say, here's what's cool. You can see on the book itself that this was something called the Pocket Poet Series. And what's it supposed to do? You can shove it in your pocket right there in front of the students in your back pocket. And you can show this is kind of what's cool about Lawrence Ferlinghetti as a publisher, is he had this idea that he wanted poetry to be very accessible. And so I showed them that not only with Ginsberg, but I also brought in lunch poems because we had read Frank O'Hara somewhere in this time period as well. So, great. These are just all kinds of different things that I talked about with Howl already. And I'm not going to go through all of that because what I want to do is get back to Kerouac. So, okay, so now we're going to go back to the, and of course I want to get into the text and start reading it and having, forcing students to participate in that in just a moment. You'll remember on this one page of notes that this is the only part that I actually put up on the overhead. It says at the very bottom, footnote explanation of Marcel Proust's novel. So now that gives us a chance to go here. And then you can see that Proust is mentioned both in the biographical introduction to Kerouac, and also there's a footnote about Proust in the last chapter. So Proust's, so what does this say? Kerouac's quote, "My work comprises one vast book like Proust's, except that my remembrances are written on the run instead of afterwards in a sickbed, blah, blah, blah." So then I show them that, and then I say, so you want to write down something about Proust, and then let's look also at the footnote of Proust, which appears in the last chapter. Here we go. So, great. So now here's the other thing about Proust. French novelist, author of the semi-autobiographical novel A la recherche du temps perdu. Now, I don't want to go any longer without forcing the students to participate. And I do mean forcing because in my college literature classes, participation is required and graded. I say that again, in all of my literature classes, participation is required and graded. This semester, I'm teaching 2 sections of English 210, American Literature 2. And so that literally just means raise your hand and answer questions. That's all. It's really simple. So that's what participation is, required and graded. So now I could say something like, I can start asking some open-ended questions and saying, okay, time for participation. And so I might say something like, so here we have the title of Proust's novel, which I would have already said is often in the top 3 most important novels ever written in the history of humankind. So that's how good Proust's novel is. Also tell them, notice it says 7 volume. It's the biggest novel ever. I regret to say I have only ever read volume 1 of Proust, Swan's Way, which is beautiful. Someday before I'm dead, I hope to finish the rest of Proust. So, A la recherche du temps perdu. And now I say, now what do you guys know nothing about Proust. What do you think about these 2 different ways of translating the title? A remembrance of things past or in search of lost time? Just guess, just kind of subjectively, what are the differences in those translations of the title? that gives them an opportunity to just start participating. You can chat about that for a second. It's kind of fun. So now looking back again at my lesson plan, this on the screen is the only thing that I showed to the students. Everything else that I have here is just printed, which is why it's kind of sloppy and poorly written. This is just printed in my hands as sort of a script to go through. So, we go back here to the beginning of this, we can see that now we want to read the first 2 sentences of the novel and all of the famous last paragraph, and then we're going to look at this. So again, this part right now, this is just kind of my script to refer to as we're not lecturing anymore. This is participation and, a line by line close reading of some of the things. So we read the first 2 sentences. We immediately skip to the last paragraph. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Let's go ahead and skip to the last paragraph right now because we're already in there. Good. Okay, so this is the famous last paragraph. I would read this out loud in class while I have it up on the overhead, and also the students have their textbook out in front of them. And so read this bad boy out loud. I won't do that right now, even though I want to, because I friggin' love this paragraph. In America, when the sun goes down, blah, blah, blah. In Iowa, I know by now the children must be crying. And so I've set them up with a question. Say, okay, what do you make of this very last paragraph? What are some of the themes which might be in it about the whole novel? And this is the way we're starting our discussion. Of course, they've read this. They've done the reading because they knew they were going to get a quiz. So, but they didn't know exactly what my question was going to be. Now, so I've read that, and then, there you go. So I've read that out loud, and then they're forced now to answer my question. What kind of themes or motifs might you see in this? And so since students are using physical textbooks and not computers, they cannot use AI or do anything like that. They just have to figure it out with their brains, which is, I cannot imagine teaching literature any other way. So students are smart. And so eventually one of them will raise their hand and say, well, it's kind of clear like he's in New York, he's looking over to the West Coast, and say something like that. And I go, perfect. So now you can kind of see that this is 100% a novel about America. Also, then I could say, okay, great. Now, what's his tone here? If this is a novel about America, what's his tone? Is it dismissive? Is it critical? Is it conceited? Is it snarky? And so then I just let them think. Somebody raises their hand. And of course, which is why I like it personally, it's none of those characteristics describe this. It's loving and warm, and it's of course Kerouac being in love with America. It's being in love with it, and also being in love with the actual physical way America is. So it's so beautiful. We could have already talked about where he wrote this, which of course was in Chelsea, in Manhattan. West 20th Street. I think the 400 block of West 20th Street. So he was literally a block and a half away from the Hudson River when he was sitting there in the spring of 1951 writing this novel in 3 weeks. So he was literally looking out. The Hudson River is a block and a half away. Across that is New Jersey, and he's thinking about America rolling out. Maybe a student will say, I have no idea what God is Pooh Bear. And so then kind of reflect it back to them and think, well, let's just play with that a little bit. What could it mean if it's positive? What could it mean if it's negative? And for me, I think that it's kind of a loving thing, like God is something beautiful and loving and friendly. There is a book called The Tao of Pooh, which is kind of a cool book. It explains how Winnie the Pooh is kind of Zen and follows Taoist principles from the Tao Te Ching. That book was not written until the 1980s, so it's not like Kerouac thought about that. But anyway, but it could also be, you could, if you wanted to interpret it, that God is a make-believe, like God is Pooh Bear. But even if you do that, it's still a beautiful thing. Okay, well, obviously it ends with him saying, I think of Dean Moriarty, I think of old Dean Moriarty, the father we never found, I think of Dean Moriarty. Now let's go back here, and now, of course, the very first sentence of the entire novel is, I first met Dean not long after my wife and I split up, blah, blah, blah. With the coming of Dean began the part of my life you could call my life on the road, the title of the novel. So now to students, ask them a question along the lines of, so why dedicate an entire novel, basically? This isn't true, but this is a way to frame it to the students who've only read the first and last chapters. Why make someone else the central character of your novel? So you get all kinds of questions, or not questions, but responses from the student. That's wonderful. Now you go back to here and say, okay, well, we talked about, so again, we'll look at the part that I actually had on the overhead and, had with my students. Now I say, okay, so I explained a little bit about archetypal literary criticism. And so then you look at that very final statement there. Dean precipitates a change in the narrator, and it's the wanderer archetype. So now let's go back to the novel. And of course, I think that that's completely true, what I'm sharing with you and what I share with my students. However, that's my interpretation, and not every, teacher would agree with that or think it's the most important thing to emphasize. Teaching is sometimes idiosyncratic, and that's okay. Now, again, we want to continue with what I would call a close reading, because we want to spend as much time as possible looking at the text, and then also, okay, sorry about that. Had a little technical difficulty. So again, you want to start with the text. Make the text your focus. That's everything in literature. So now these again are just in bold, are the things which I'm going to ask the students. And then again, what you see on the screen is not something I have on the overhead or share with the students. It's just for myself. It's just kind of like a script, like what do I want to highlight? So you can see some of the questions here, which I'm going to ask. How is the coming of Dean Moriarty explained? So I ask that to the students. They have to sort of look and wrestle with the text. And what I'm trying to get them to see is that it's in the passive. There was talk. There was talk of Dean coming. There was talk. He came like this. And it's in this kind of, mythic way, like he's some force of nature. Then again, I'm going to ask the students, how does Dean speak to Mary Lou? What's he trying to describe? And you'll see there my answer is I'm trying to emphasize, this is in the very first page of the novel, when he and Mary Lou get off the Greyhound and they go to the cafeteria, and he's like, but I can't tell you all the stuff about Missouri and the Boonville Reformatory and blah, 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 because now we've got to begin our workday plans and blah, 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 blah. And it's this fascination that Dean and Sal Paradise have with time. They are, in my opinion, that's the most important thing about On the Road is one of my favorite novels ever written. It's probably why I became an English major in some ways. But one of the things which is important is the ability when they're enjoying jazz to be completely in the moment. And when they're in that perfect zone of total bliss, total feelings of carefree and happiness and joy, to try and retain some of that in a very Zen way in their regular life. That's what Sal is trying to do. Neil is also trying to do that, and oftentimes does do that. And so there you go. So that's one of the main things. And that's why, of course, Kerouac is so influenced by Proust, because Proust was obsessed with time. He was obsessed with memory. He was obsessed with his own life and how he thought of his own life. And so is Kerouac. Great. So again, just really quickly, I'll try to do this fairly quickly because I didn't want this video to be too long. I might look at the top of the page there. Here's another sentence. I went to the cold water flat with the boys. How is Dean described? What does it say? Well, especially if, now, in my class, we're reading the first published version of On the Road in 1957. But if you read the original scroll manuscript, you would recognize that Dean actually comes to the door naked, and he was literally just, making love to Mary Lou. So, and we see that he says, Kerouac writes, sex was the one and only wholly important thing in life. And there is undoubtedly all through the novel and all through Kerouac's entire life and work, this idea that real life, the grittiness of it, the diners, the working on the railroad, the working on the SS Dorchester, all of the things Kerouac has done, the hitchhiking, the griminess and the everyday aspect of life is holy. It's spiritual, it's religious. Great. Now move into Dean meeting Carlo Marx, and of course that's Allen Ginsberg. And so let's talk a little bit about this. At the top of the page, it says page 1258, so this is in the textbook. There's a small paragraph which I would read out loud, and one night when Dean ate supper, blah, blah, blah. And so this is when Kerouac is out in Ozone Park in Queens with his mother. And Dean has come out there to ask him about how to write, and Dean's waiting for him to finish something so that they can go back to Manhattan, and they have a possible date with a couple of girls. And so Dean is like, come on, man, go quick. And Kerouac says right there, he writes, it was one of the best chapters in my life. So it's the kind of big question I'm giving to students, and I'm helping them to understand, and which hopefully you'll understand too, is that it's not just that Dean catalyzes this love for being on the road, or this love for movement, or what Jungians often call the wanderer archetype, or the rebel archetype as well sometimes. But it's also this idea that Neil is forcing him to change who he is. And so Jack Kerouac is getting slow. He's going to get to the point of understanding that spontaneity and intuition are the most important concepts for him as a writer. So when he's forced to write quickly, this would be in his first book that he's writing, The Town and the City. When he's forced to do that, it ends up being one of the best chapters he's ever written, according to Kerouac himself. Great. So next, maybe talk a little bit about how, so now looking at the top of the page here, again, my notes, it says, top of page 1259, they, meaning Neil Cassidy and Allen Ginsberg, rushed down the street together, and I shambled after as I had been doing all my life after people who interest me. It's a very, very famous paragraph. It's really beautiful. It's about the only ones who interest me are the ones who are mad to live, mad to, blah, blah, blah. And so then you can read that and then say, why is this? What does this say about Dean? What does it say about Kerouac as a writer? And of course, it's all about how right now Kerouac is this observer. By the end of the novel, he's going to have lived so much more in those 3 years, and he's going to be a better writer as well. Great. Let's look at this. So now I'm going to scroll down a little bit, but we're still looking at the very top of the page. Carlo and Sal see Dean off. They became a trifecta, growing together, blah, blah, blah. What did Dean get out of this trip to New York City? So I'm asking that to my students. What did he get? So they have to look and think about it a little bit, and then eventually somebody's going to come up with the answer, which, by the way, it's important to just recognize. Think about it. Dean said that he wanted to come out. Neil Cassidy said that he wanted to come out to learn to write. What did he do? He just met the two people who are going to be, he just met Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, became besties with them both, and spent time with them both. And now they're seeing him off at the Greyhound station. And on top of that, he's got a brand new portable typewriter that he's taking on the Greyhound back to Denver. So there you go. Dean gets things done, man. So that's really beautiful. Okay, great. This is a really important paragraph here. So we're going to look at it in the text. And it is something now, we would have now at this point, ended our first day of class, and then this would be how it would start off day 2 of the 2 days of teaching Kerouac Kerouac and on the road. Okay, so now it says on my notes that sometimes what I like to do is at the beginning of day 2, I can bring this up. This could be one of the ways that I do day 2 of Kerouac, and I didn't do it this time this month, but I think I did do it last time in April. And so this is famous. This is Kerouac's it's just called Kerouac's Essentials of Modern Prose. And he wrote this in 1953, and then it was published in 1957. So this is a nice way to start day 2. Put this up in the overhead. The students haven't seen it yet. Leave it up there and then go, okay, now, so I want you guys to take a few moments, just kind of read through this a little bit. I could be taking attendance, actually, or, kind of getting myself ready at the front of the class. Say, read through this, and the very first thing that you're going to respond to is, what do you see in here that is religious in nature? Since I have said that, according to Kerouac, he was a devout Catholic and he was a Buddhist, and there's nothing that mattered to him more than those two things, and probably Catholicism even more so. But what do you see in here that's religious? And so then students are looking at that, and then class has to begin with them participating, which is, good, because I've already sort of lectured at the beginning of class 1. And so you can just do that yourself if you want to. I'm not going to do it here in the video because I want to move forward. But, it's so beautiful to think about, for Kerouac, how is there spirituality and holiness and religion in his essentials of prose writing. It's really cool. Also, just one other little thing. You'll see here, number 14, it says, like Proust, be an old tea head of time. In this list of essentials of modern prose, these 30 items, the only time he mentions another writer in this list is Proust. So, of course, in reality, if you go back to 1950, 1951, 1952, around the time of course, he wrote On the Road in 1951. Well, he started writing it in 1948. He if you read the original scroll manuscript, there's an excellent essay in the published book version of the original scroll manuscript, written about how many sort of aborted different attempts Kerouac had at writing On the Road in multiple different ways for several years before the, famous 1951 3-week stream of consciousness. Anyway, so he was reading Proust. He was also reading a lot of Dostoevsky and Joyce. Great way to start day 2 of Kerouac. Put this up and then have the students say, what do you think of this? And just also, do you like this? What seems weird? What seems cool? Is there anything you don't understand? It's a great way to start class. Now, so this is the other important thing to see. This is actually very, very important. If you've never noticed this paragraph before, this is central to my hypothesis that there is an individuation process going on with Kerouac writing this novel. So, then came spring, the great time of So this is back to chapter 1. Everybody in the scattered gang was getting ready to take one trip or another. I was busily at work on my novel, and when I came to the halfway mark after a trip down south with my aunt to visit my brother Rocco, I got ready to travel west for the very first time. Now I say to students, okay, the point of life is not to be a wanderer or a rebel your whole time. If you do that, you're probably going to end up addicted to drugs or dead somewhere. That's not a prescription for anybody ever. Yes, is it cool to be a wanderer or a rebel at some point as a college student and as a human being? Absolutely. And that's what we see in the novel. But what is going on here? Tell me what you see here, which is important for people who are ambitious. You should see these own qualities in yourself. What do you think? So I give that question to the students, force them to participate. And the answer is, it's that we're seeing here that Kerouac is doing two things. Number one, he's a hard worker. He's busily at work on his novel. He came to the halfway mark. So he's ambitious. He's not a student at Columbia University anymore, but he's hanging around with people from there, with Ginsberg, Burroughs, etc. He's working hard as an aspiring writer. Very important. Then also, I would say that just in this paragraph, He says after a trip down south with my aunt to visit my brother Rocco. Now, in reality, that's after a trip with his mother to visit his sister and his sister's husband, probably in North Carolina. He got ready to travel. So, but that shows Kerouac having positive family relationships, which is also an important thing for a human being to have if you want to be a functional member of society and ambitious, which I tell my students, that's what I want for you. Whether you want to be nurses or lawyers or medical doctors or go out into corporate America, I want you to be ambitious and successful. And so we're understanding that the wanderer archetype is only one thing which needs to be a part of your growth at some point. But you also need to be hard at work, and whatever your family makeup might be, you should have some kind of positive relationships with them. So really cool. Okay, great. Now let's skip to, and again, just because the Norton Anthology only has the first chapter of the novel and the last chapter of the novel, we have to skip to this. This is, that's okay. So getting back to a close reading, I say to my students, okay, this paragraph toward the beginning of the very last chapter of the novel, very important. And sometimes they don't quite even understand this. You probably do if you've read Kerouac before, or if you're older, or if you're a big fan of On the Road, you understand it. 19, 20-year-old college students sometimes don't really understand what's going on here. Read the entire thing out loud. In the fall, I myself started back home from Mexico City, and one night just over Laredo border in Dilley, Texas, I was standing on the hot road underneath an arc lamp with the summer moths smashing into it when I heard the sound of footsteps from the darkness beyond, and lo, a tall old man with flowing white hair came clomping by with a pack on his back. And when he saw me as he passed, he said, "Go moan for man," and clomped on back to his dark. So, I say to my students, what in the world was that? I'm telling you for a fact that that's important. You tell me, first of all, what just happened and why is it important? Now, sometimes you get students who understand this right away. Sometimes not at all. Last spring in April, when I remember when I was teaching at one of my classes filled with intelligent students, they're really cool students. They just had no idea. They were like, we don't understand this at all. Like they had no idea. They just literally did not understand it. But when I taught it 2 weeks ago, I had a class where there was a very intelligent student, and she said, there was a little bit of quiet first. So I said, well, who is this person? A tall old man with flowing white hair. And so then one of the students raised their hands, and she gave a perfect answer. And she said, well, it's like a prophet or some kind of mystical thing. And I go, exactly right. It's like a prophet. It's surreal. Who knows? Did it really happen? But this prophet is saying to Jack Kerouac, go moan for man, meaning, what does that mean? I asked the students. And what I think it means is, well, look at what Kerouac says in the next sentence. Did this mean that I should go at last on my pilgrimage on foot on the dark roads? I struggled and hurried. So Kerouac, as the narrator, doesn't even understand it himself because it's kind of so cryptic. And in my experience in life, if you are sort of living life fully and working hard and doing all kinds of different things, and you have morals and values, but you're also ambitious, then you'll have these moments to refer to them. I would refer to them as Jung and his followers would, which this would be some kind of moment of synchronicity. And it's like the universe, appearing as an old prophet. And it's not telling him to go on a pilgrimage. It's telling him to go write this novel. And so, anyway, very important there. Great. So we talk a little bit about this these last couple pages. And what I would say about this, and I think I got this from, there's if you've never seen it before, there's an excellent set of YouTube videos from Yale University. And one of them, I think, is called The American Novel Since 1945 or something like that. And the woman who's the professor is very smart. It's a good series of videos. I think I got this from her, but I can't remember where I got it from. Basically, the idea is that by the end of this, Dean has kind of become pre-verbal, like he can't even speak anymore. He's kind of like grunting. And by the end of this, you see that, in fact, Neil / Dean has not, it's kind of sad if you are like myself, a Kerouac fan and know a lot about all the different figures. Of course, it's really sad what happened to Neil Cassidy because, you know, um, he lost his thumb, and then the things that he did with Ken Kesey were really cool, and driving the bus and all of that stuff. But I mean, he died far too young, and he had kind of a tragic life in a lot of ways. And with Kerouac, of course, Kerouac had a much more stable family background. Kerouac had a very, very stable childhood. His father was well known in Lowell, Massachusetts. Great parents. Of course, he had the death of his brother, which was painful. But Kerouac had a wonderful, wonderful family upbringing. And of course, Neil Cassidy, if you know anything about his biography, did not at all. Well, we can see in the very first paragraph, if you read between the lines, it says, Dean, right here, it says, Dean is the perfect guy for the road because he was actually born on the road when his parents were passing through Salt Lake City. But of course, if you know a little bit about Neil Cassidy, it's really sad because, his father was homeless and his mother wasn't part of his life. So he literally, when he was a child, he was homeless. And he was probably assaulted as well as a child. So really sad stuff. Well, I'm going to finish this up. And so, again, what I wanted to do is just kind of show, not lecture on this in this video, but to show you how I teach, how I really teach this to my students. So again, this is just kind of like in red here. This is just for me to kind of remind myself, this is what I want to do on the first day. The second day, I want there to be an emphasis in the spiritual quest of the novel. So that's why I might have had the students look at the essentials of prose and talk a little bit about what's religious there and why it's religious. And they can even, disagree. Lots of students are religious, obviously, and could say, do you guys think that this is, heretical in some way? Do you disagree with him? And that's fine too. So, and then just before I finish things up, I will say, and again, just so you kind of understand the mechanics of this. So what's on the screen right now, this is the only thing that I put on the overhead, was this information here. And I partly did that because when I start the very first day of teaching Kerouac, I have a quiz, and I want this to be up on the overhead so that the students, when they finish their quiz, can put them face down and then get out whatever they want to take notes on. Then when everybody's done with the quiz, of course, they just pass them up to the front, and I collect them, and then they've had an opportunity to take this information down. But all of the rest of the stuff was just for me. Now, here, I'll show you a couple of journal prompts, because at the end of every class that I teach literature, our students are required to do a stream of consciousness journal writing for 10 minutes. And so this is what I used with my students. Used it exactly like this, Monday, November 17, 2025. So again, in that class, we had it was an hour and 15-minute class, and defined some things from archetypal literary theory. Then we went through a little bit of Kerouac's biography, read the first few lines of paragraph 1 and all of the last paragraph of the novel, then talked a little bit about Dean Moriarty, and then went through a sort of line-by-line close reading of chapter 1. Good, and so then this would have been the journaling prompt that I use at the close of day 1. I tried to explain a little bit about archetypal psychology. Dean Moriarty is initiating Kerouac and Ginsberg into the Wanderer stage. And by the way, I kind of glossed over it more quickly in this video, but in the class, I would have made sure that students understand what is a Wanderer rebel. And of course, in the Star Wars movies, that's definitely Han Solo. Who is the spiritual mentor? That's definitely Yoda. Princess Leia is usually seen originally as sort of a divine goddess, because she comes, of course, as an apparition. And just to sort of look back, at those notes that I had on the overhead, the hero's journey, the quest journey, this comes not only from Joseph Campbell, but also from lots of other Jungians. The hero's journey usually starts off with some kind of suffering. So for Luke Skywalker, it comes because, the stormtroopers come down and kill his aunt and uncle, and he's kind of forced to like go off on this. He chooses it too, but he's kind of forced to go off. So there's usually suffering, which is what precipitates a heroic journey. And of course, that was true in the very first sentence of On the Road. What is the very first sentence says, I first met Dean not long after he got divorced from his wife, and also after his father died. And so a lot of Jungians point out that being orphaned in some way can be a part of the sort of call to a quest. So good. So first of all, going back to the journaling prompt here, first of all, does this make sense to you and how I helped analyze the first day of looking at the novel? Second, do you agree with this idea of stages? And have you ever been in a wanderer stage? So that's a perfect way to transition into them having to do a 10-minute journal entry at the very end of class. Pretty good way to end the video for us. I have different prompts that I use for journaling on the second day. Sometimes they deal with the wanderer, or sometimes they have something to do with the fact that in my reading and in my teaching of the novel, I emphasize that it's not necessarily a religious novel, but the novel, Kerouac's novel, is it's a quest narrative, but it also has as its central motif, like sort of trying to control time at times, but also be present in a sort of Zen manner, which is why they're obsessed with the blues, etc., or not the blues, with jazz. And so I might ask them something about, do you agree with my reading and my interpretation that I gave you, that this novel, or what you've read of it, is a spiritual quest? And if they want to disagree, that's fine. That's a good way to do their journal. Okay, well, thank you so much for watching the video. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing for more videos on literature and life.